when you know the problem, the solution is like 20% of the thing. If you ask the right questions, if you define the problem, you're going to be fine. What's possible right here, right now to do with the means that you have and the people that are around you, you have to fall in love with the impact, not your method or mode of chosen execution or whatever. Like, you have to fall in love with the impact. And that's where you're like aiming your eyes. And what is the problem that makes you want to do this?
Yeah. Welcome back to the Untapped podcast. I'm very excited to have a dear friend, Shani, with us today, who is an expert in helping people create, world-class customer experiences or client experiences. And Shani had actually run a session. We've done some personal growth stuff together. And then she came into the Untapped community and ran a really amazing session around one of her unique kind of 5C methods, which I'm sure we'll explore at some point today. And then I said, we've got to get you on the podcast because this is such a valuable conversation and a really important conversation for creators, entrepreneurs, people in service-based industries who are, building these experiences for customers. We need to get this conversation wider. So, Shani, thank you for being here. And I would love to just hand over to you to do a little intro about you and your world before we dive in.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Me. I think I have a red thread in caring about humans. That's always been the thing that I'm curious about, and everything ranging from culture to how we communicate, languages, just in any way, shape, or form, how we create context for ourselves and other people to really thrive, to feel good, to be able to do things that we want to. So I spent a really long career in HR in different capacities. And I would say about 7 or 8 years ago, I came across human-centered design, which is the essence of a lot of experience creation. And it really changed my outlook both on how you solve for people, but also on life itself. I think it kind of helped me get off the perfectionist train and into a much more playful, interactive, empathetic way of doing things. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the lens.
Amazing. Yeah, I think for anyone who's listening, can you give us a little 101? Because when we say user-centered or, human-centric, how would you define that, just so we, make sure that those tuning in with us can have that context from the start?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for asking. Well, I think the thing with customer-centric, employee-centric, human-centric is there's no like one universal explanation. There's a lot of interpretation on this, but the beauty of it is that it's actually quite flexible. But to my knowledge and from my perspective, it is about always rooting into what we know about who we're creating for when we create. And starting with that. So usually what that means on a very practical level is you cannot create something based on your assumptions. You have to have insights. And that might be qualitative, that might be quantitative, it might be a combination of both. But it is really about tapping into your curiosity, your empathy, your listening, and kind of putting your opinions or hypothesis or whatever it is aside, and then using what we learn to move forward. And when we say it like this, it sounds super banal, but I've also spent like more than a decade in corporate seeing people go, here's the problem, let's throw solutions at it. And it's pure guessing games, and we keep redoing solutions and we keep not getting the impact out of it that we want. So I think for me, the essence is really that we're always departing from having information about the people that we're serving.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of the human-centeredness. And further down the process, also involving people in the creation of solutions.
Yeah.
So it's with and for people.
Yeah.
Whereas usually we create for people, we create for and with. So it's a more of a hand-holding process where you can actually leverage the feedback, the communication throughout, and not make it about whatever decisions you're making, but it's conversation about value creation.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. So for those tuning in, it's like we're flipping the paradigm of how we design things so that we're going to get better outcomes. We're going to get more buy-in. We're actually going to create the impact. So I think this was huge. I first came into my world. Actually, one of my best friends did the IDOU, like had done some extra study, and then we added the human-centered design thinking method into some trainings we used to do, and it was really incredible seeing the solutions, like the entrepreneurial business solutions and things that would come when this method was applied. And for me personally, I know that I was someone who always thought I had to have my shit together, look like I knew what I was doing, be a perfectionist. And so it really paradigm flipped how I operated as well, because I was always someone that thought I would have to, particularly I come from corporate, come forward with my ideas, my well thought out plans. And working with my best friend delivering this training, she was like, no, it's nothing to do with what you think you would bring to the table. It's like they have all the answers. You are the facilitator of getting that wisdom. And it was interesting how much for me, like letting go of the big thing was like needing to look like I knew what I was doing. It was like,
Yeah.
I really know what I'm doing. And now I'm asking you if you know what we should do. But it's not saying that. It's also like facilitating it, right? So yeah, that's amazing. And so how would you, just so like people have a bit more context as well, because that's like very theoretical, right? Is how might you be applying this in day to day with businesses, and like what are kind of practical applications of this design experience?
Yeah, I think as a start, I mean, even just companies that I facilitate, so I mainly facilitate conversations around employee experience, which is by no means less important than client experiences, and essentially is the same thing. But I think a lot of the conversations that I have, and actually a lot of the things that I might highlight that kind of stand out as opposed to how we usually plan things, is a lot in asking, like, have you actually spoken to the employee? Without exaggeration, I spent 6 years being invited to meetings almost solely because I was the only person to ask, did you speak to the person you're giving the solution to? And the answer would almost always be no. And so I think there's one perspective here, which is super, super practical, is if you haven't spoken to them, you probably shouldn't start. And to add to that, I always add, don't use filters. If you're in an organization, don't speak through a representative. Don't talk to the manager. If you're helping someone in customer service, talk to somebody in customer service.
Love that.
If you're helping, like, talk to who you're helping.
That.
If you're, and that is, for me, it's like one of the really essential practices is I spent years and years, and people said, yeah, well, I spoke to this HR business partner, or I spoke to this leader. I said, but are they the ones who are going to be served by this? No.
Yeah.
Then you don't have insights.
Yeah.
You have a filter of assumptions moving up the line of whatever line it is, if you're working client facing or inside an organization. So I think that's, for me, the very, very basic first step. Do you actually have the information? Yeah. A second thing that I think is a really important application, and that I think we often fall into the habit of doing, is don't ask people for wish lists.
Yes.
We tend to do this, right? We're like, oh, so I see this is a problem. What would you like? What do you envisage for your solution? No. This is also a guidance that I very often tell people, don't ask this. Ask them how they behave around something. Ask them how they solve problems. Ask them what questions they have about things as they're facing things. Ask them how a good experience feels to them. You're the expert on putting together the solution. If they tell you what the solution is, what are you going to do?
Perfect.
So that's another application I think we can be really, really mindful of, is really getting into that, because the solution comes down the line when we understand the problem. Yes. And so, yeah, that's actually a third thing, which also sounds really counterintuitive, is be problem focused, not solution focused.
Gold.
Okay. when you know the problem, the solution is like 20% of the thing. If you ask the right questions, if you define the problem, you're going to be fine. And I trust most people work with this have an amazing amount of creativity to figure out fantastic solutions with their competence. If only they actually know what it is they're solving.
Yeah. We're the first thing we say. So when our students come to the incubator, and I'm thinking, so for those tuning in, you can use this at like your initial business conception design, like for offers, programs, whatever. And then you can also use this in making your programs better. And then in hiring team and building a great team culture, like this exact methodology can go across your entire business. And one thing as you're speaking, I'm like, yes, 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 because the incubator program, that's the first thing Delaney says. And like, they do their own vision, their own mission, like what we want to connect to as entrepreneurs. And then the next week is market research, and it's all just speaking to people. And it is amazing the resistance people have to going and speaking to real humans, right? And it's so interesting when I see the avatar document or the client document, because I can immediately tell if this was real. Like, you can just see straight away, was this real conversations and real things that people said, or like a conceptualized version of what you think the problem is. It's amazing. And Dee always says, like, we are not here to sell products or services. We are here to solve problems. And until you figure out what the problem is, we don't move on to making an offer a solution. And it's sad. I mean, I'm sure you see this like tenfold. It's so sad how much resources go into people making these offers or these programs that then flop because no one wanted them, or all these internal employee solutions that are like, what a waste of money because of what didn't solve the thing, right? It's like, it's wild. Yeah. Oh, go music to my ears. So we've got to talk to real people, real people. And I think I saw a thing the other day. Someone was like, "Oh, what's a prompt for Chat GPT for this?" And I was like, "No, real people." So funny. I was like,
the ones you actually want to be, in business with,
so
helping
good.
out. Yes.
So we've got to get to this core piece around giving up bringing solutions, and instead finding the problem through conversations, through really curiosity, and like listening to our customers, students, employees, whoever it is we're designing for. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then tell me, so I guess, then for you, once you're working, or let's say someone, okay, I found what I think is the problem, what would you then advise? Like, they have these interviews, they do this process, they find kind of what they think the problem is with their offer or their process or their system, then what?
Yeah, good question. And I think I'll give the worst answer to start with is it depends. It depends what the problem is also. And I think the beauty of human-centered design is the toolbox is so vast. And there are so many options where you go. I think as a principle, start small. And I think start with something and maybe test it. Find a couple of people or a group of people that you can test something with, get their feedback, get their input, iterate, do the next, because we can only be where we are with these things. And I think, especially also being an entrepreneur, it's really easy, of course, because we are engaged and we love this impact and this big dream of what it could look like. And we can all draw out, and we've all been in things that are like 6 years down the line of whatever creation it is actually like what's possible right here, right now to do with the means that you have and the people that are around you. I know a few years back I was leading a big project internally in a big corporate, and we were all struggling because I had people like 20%, 30%, like nobody was doing this full time, and it kept coming into meetings going, Shani, what are we doing in 6 months? What are we doing until the end of the year? And I was like, guys, I have no idea. Like, the 6 months is a long time. I don't know. And at some point I remember I was like, okay, we created this vision. We have it. Like, we know when we'll get there, but what we're doing now is like driving with a GPS. You get to put your destination in, but you can only see this little square in your car, and you can only move with what's visible to you. And that's it. You can't zoom out. You can't, like, we don't know. You only get to, like, look at the square, look around. What is the next available thing? What's the next available opportunity to test something? So, of course, yeah, put your love into it, put your thinking into it, design something. Just the other week, I read, I think it was some like high up like Netflix executive creator. He said, no, I don't even do minimum viable products. I do minimum unviable products because it changes so
Yeah.
much. And it made me laugh, but I also was like, yeah, I think, sometimes is as terrible as it sounds. And this is coming from somebody who is like, I mean, I built my career on hardcore A-type ambition and perfectionism for the most part. I also think sometimes just let it go, like create something little, test the thought
Yeah.
out, like do a little prototype, even just do it in like 3 slides and present it to something and have another conversation and build it out again. So I think that's a little bit what's next is like keep the conversation going, show people that you heard them
Yeah.
out, and
Go again.
then take it and
I
go
love
again,
that.
like,
I
and
love
build
that
from
like
it.
metaphor of the GPS Jeep thing, because, or like what you can see on your
Mhm.
GPS, because that's often, and I know how uncomfortable that often is for people because we want to pretend like we know exactly what's going to happen. It's that same kind of ego death perfection-y, like, oh, I don't, they're going to find me out. Like, I don't actually know what I'm doing kind of thing that's happening. But I think you get more comfortable with that. And then eventually you realize like you are still steering the ship and creating solutions and coming up and iterating, right? And I really love that metaphor because that is often, I think, how a lot of our students feel and how people early on in this like experience feel. And yeah, even with ours, it's like, okay, make a little beta version, get 4 people to do, the first iteration, get some feedback again and go again. And it's so that is such a perfect way to think about it. It's like we do know eventually where we want it to go, but the reality is that's like trying to control the whole thing. And if you try to do that, you are not working with people, right? Because you're just barging straight
No.
over them for what you think they need. So that
Mm.
slower approach and that iterative, okay, what's next on the map, is so like you really get that time with people. Like,
Yeah, and you also get to ground in having a sense of security in that what you're creating is good
yeah,
a lot earlier than if you're spending months and months creating something in the dark and then putting it out there. Because I think quite often we can release something out into the world much quicker than we
yeah.
think it's ready. And I always like listen out for that point of like, are we looping around in these thoughts too much? Is it actually adding anything that we're just talking about this internally? Or would this just benefit from this infusion of actually input from somebody? And quite often that point is much quicker than we
Yeah.
think. And that said, I practice this and I still like sit in meetings and get stuck in loops where we're like, what are we doing? Like, why don't we just ask somebody? So it's also very much a practice with ourselves. And also I think I had to loop back to your thought in the beginning around this need to show up as competent. And I think part of working with more human-centered thinking is actually putting your competence in your ability to ask questions and not in your ability to have
Nice.
answers is a really, really different place of existing
Oh,
from. Um, so yeah, I think I remember I was teaching a class like a couple of years back and they were quite young people and they were like, yeah, but I want to be exactly what you said. I want to be professional. So I wouldn't ask this of a client, but I will ask it of you. And I said, guys, this is literally what I've made my career out of. You should be asking those questions. They're great questions. Show up with
yeah.
those. Like that shows a lot of confidence actually, but it's counterintuitive in a
It
way.
is for sure. And often, yeah, it's interesting. We talk about this a bit as well because in the incubator, there's like a whole document of types of questions, right? There's just to show some like theoretical concepts. It's like, tell me more about how you've tried to solve these challenges, or can you take me into a day in your life and just like run me through what, how it unfolds and how you feel. And these are all like really kind of open things. And then it's interesting sometimes because people put like leading questions like into the solution. I used to be terrible at this, right? It's like, would you like an 8-week program that solves this for you? It's like, that is not a. Delaney used to listen to my market research interviews and be like, "Oh, Bridie," and then he'd teach me because he's like trained in it as well. But it's just like letting go of, you're not trying to lead to solutions. Like you're just taking so much curiosity and really is getting their whole world, right? It's like, do I understand their entire world, how it's impacting them, and what the real challenge is? Is there any like favorite like line of questioning that you often go down, or does it really depend on the context?
I would say this though, just based on what you were saying, like how we tend to guide questions with our assumptions. I will say this: there is one exercise that I think is fantastic to do before you do any line of questioning, is to sit down with yourself and write down, what would I like to be true?
Oh, cool.
And then you take that list and you put it to the side and you make sure you're not asking any questions that go down that
I love
line.
that.
Basically. I think it's really, really important before you go into any interviews. There's a pre-moment to asking your questions, is being aware of your biases and your preferences and your already assumptions. And sometimes, your questions will confirm your hypothesis. Most of us interact a lot with the people that we want to help. And it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, but I would say most of the time when I open up the line of questioning, I will find the nuance or the emphasis to be placed on a slightly different place than where I had placed it. I think my favorite way to ask things is usually very open questions. And then like digging a little bit deeper. Why? Okay, why was this? Why was that? Generally I go down like two lanes. One is, tell me about a moment when this was good, whatever it is. You can give a little bit of framing, but not too much. Just give people like an area. And then, why was it good? Why do you think you felt that way? Why do you choose to do this over that? And then same with things that are challenging. Tell me a moment that was challenging to you. And then what I often ask is, how do you solve it? So for example, a couple of years back, we did research and we asked some people like, okay, we were curious about something. They're like, how do you generally like to learn something? How do you like to consume knowledge? And they were like, yeah, I do this, this, and this, and that. And then I was like, okay, and what happens when shit hits the fan and you're super stressed, and like, what are the things you're still doing? And then they got to like pull those over, like, oh, okay, this was interesting. And then all of a sudden I had like a much more nuanced picture. So you can throw in scenarios, you can do things, but I think it's more be led by them. And I would look out for when people start telling you what solutions they want. Then I would think, no, that's not what I want to know. Then I would dig a little bit deeper behind. So I've seen this a lot when you ask that, can you share about your challenges? Well, my challenge is to build this thing. No, that's not your challenge. That's your response to your challenge. What is the problem that makes you want to do this? That made you like diagnose this problem. And so, there are like some things that you can look out for, I think, where sometimes when I've seen like data that comes back and their problem is they need to build a program like this. And I'm like, well, why do they think they need a program? Now I still don't know anything about their challenge actually, because I know just what solutions they want to create. And that doesn't give you any creative liberty to create something for them with your competence. Because you're like, okay, now I have to fit into this tiny, tiny box of creating a learning program for somebody. So there are like more, I think, mindsets of like, what are you looking out for? Then you also have to write questions in a way that you feel comfortable expressing them. So you're not feeling like you're,
I really love that. The thing you actually said earlier about like writing down all those assumptions that you have and what you want to be true. I think it's important to actually like highlight that as an exercise, because I see that a lot. And I just opened Slack this morning and saw a screenshot from someone like, I cannot believe. So she had actually already launched a program in the world. It was a really cheap, low ticket thing. It flopped. I think not even one person bought it. So she's come into the incubator. She's in week 2. She's doing market research for the first time ever. And she just wrote this big thing like, I cannot believe the responses that have come back. I was so far from what these people actually need, these mamas that she wants to work with. She's like, I was nowhere near what I thought Like, so it was that incredible moment, and that exercise you said, for anyone listening, that is like absolute gold, is write down all the assumptions and biases you have before you go into these, and then give them up or let go of them, right? Because I think otherwise you're just going to build things that people don't really want to need, right? And I think that exercise is really, really powerful, because then you can go in and you can have a hypothesis, like you said, but it's like, I'm just going to explore and see if there's something that sticks there, but I'm open to maybe what's really going on for them. So yeah, that's gold. Wow. Okay, cool. I love that. And I think I really wanted to touch on, I know you have your 5C methodology, because I know that a bunch of people listening will be running businesses. So I think this conversation can apply to whether you're building out offerings or programs, you're figuring out how to increase engagement in your, this is one thing I think communities struggle with a bit, is how to keep people engaged in their programs or whatever. Or maybe you're running a team and you're thinking about making your team experience better. Shani, I know you have the 5C method, and I personally got to experience that training and just thought it was fantastic. And it gave me so many ideas. Into a minimum unviable product, which I also love that distinction. But yeah, I would love you to share a little bit about the 5C method, what it is about, and dive into that.
Yeah. So it's 5 E's. So just so you're clear. Yeah, no worries. And it doesn't come from us. It comes from Joe Pine and the Experience Economy. And it's a book that's been around for quite a long time, but a lot of people who work with experiences swear by this model. And I think it's because of the simplicity of it. And even if you don't apply it in designing your journey per se, then I think it's really good in terms of like exploring an experience, because we quite often just think about the moment of execution of anything. And so what this model allows us to do is to really think about the things that are leading up into it. And then and also think what happens after.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of more kind of depth to approaching the overall like thought of, because the thing is, like, I know when I started learning this, I was working with a service designer, and it was so hilarious. She's like, Shani, you didn't just wake up one morning with a bag of chips in your hands in the supermarket. Like, that never happened to anyone. Something took you there. Something triggered you to go there. You made a choice to go to that specific supermarket for a specific reason. Like, none of us open our eyes and are all of a sudden in this place of consuming something. And it also is like, I think supermarket, I know we spoke about roller coaster, but I think the supermarket is also a really perfect example of something that is an experience that extends for us. Because then you're coming home, you have your bags and you're unpacking them, right? So it's much into that like awareness that the experience doesn't start and end in like the moment of engaging with it.
Gold. Yeah.
You can also like exit, and when you're coming out of it, when you're extending it into your life in different ways, but equally when you're like enticing somebody in and when you're like engaging them into the experience, then they're like, so like on the one end, it's like, what's pulling you into the experience? What is making you make choices? What is triggering? And then there are two layers. Like, one is you need to understand what are the triggers of the person. What are the, what are the emotions that make you want to go buy a Snickers? What are those?
Love it.
Then okay, that's a moment. That's a moment you can speak to. Okay. Then, you're entering the experience, like you're entering the supermarket or the store or whatever it is that you're choosing to do. And then you're engaging. So you're purchasing, you're doing, you're consuming, and then you're going outside, and then you're actually consuming the thing you're buying as well. But, so it's that kind of train of thought, that is important, I think. And also, I really love sometimes allowing yourself to practice this thinking on things that aren't charged with anything that you need to actually achieve.
I like that.
So like the way I really learned about this was I just would like pay attention to an experience when I went to buy something. Like, I needed to buy a new phone. Like, what's that experience like? Why am I choosing to go here rather than there? How does it feel for me to walk into the
Mhm.
store? How does it feel for me as I'm getting the service? What does it feel like when I'm leaving? How is it when I come home? Like, where's the so then it also just gives us a little bit of space when we're familiarizing ourselves with it, just to observe things around in the world and like our own reactions, and then we can apply it. Because sometimes it also is feels really risky and scary to like take a new tool and apply it straight away to something that you care really deeply
Yeah.
about. You're like, oh, I don't want to screw this
Yeah.
up.
I think that's
So I really
really good
like that.
advice. Yeah, because we all have like brands and things that we love, and we don't really always inquire why, and get to the. I mean, those people have spent millions and billions sometimes of dollars doing that exact customer journey and mapping that out and making sure you get that experience. So it's often there so subconsciously. So to make it conscious with I think that's really cool. Like with something that maybe isn't as impactful as your business or your customer journey, in this amazing thing that you've just built, or yeah, just really dissecting like how this is actually happening everywhere, all around you, all at once. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. It can be a good exercise just to come into awareness
Mm,
with it, because I do think that, a lot of these like experience design and more human-centered methods of doing so, it also requires a lot more of
mhm,
us as being like participants or drivers in the
mhm.
process. It's a much less mechanical process because it has so much empathy and so much interaction baked
Yeah.
into it. It does require us to, have a certain amount of self-awareness. And I know like one of my big things that I was propagating when I led projects when I still was in corporate was you have to fall in love with the
Mm.
impact, not your method or mode of chosen execution or whatever. Like you have to fall in love with the impact. And that's where you're like aiming your eyes. And just this week I was watching, I think it was Blown Away on Netflix, which is this like glass blowing competition. And there was this woman who shared an example of when she took her like a really good course in glass blowing, and she said, yeah, first week we got to create all these things. And the end of the week, the teacher, he came along and he said, pick your favorite thing and break it.
Oh wow.
And she was like, oh, but I was like, wow, because that's exactly it, right? We create these things and we love them like a
Attached
baby
to
and
them.
we care about them so deeply and we feel like we're breaking them or we're iterating them, but we're
Mhm.
not. We're like, I spoke to somebody yesterday as well. Her name is Maya Watson, and she's, building a lot of beautiful things also for employees. And she said, yeah, I kind of feel like you're unveiling the solution rather than changing
Mm,
it.
love that.
And I thought it was also a really nice distinction that kind of helps your ego like step aside a little bit for a moment and go, okay, the good solution is there all along. What we're doing is just like slowly but surely roping it
Yeah.
out. And we don't want to get in our own way
I
about
really
it.
love that. It
Um,
reminds me a lot like we've had, I'd say, probably 30 to 50 versions of our programs to some degree, like iterations. And I notice, of course, I get attached to them. They have brands, they have alumni, they have whole things around them. But I also notice that our community get attached. That like I still get messages like, "Are you bringing that thing back?" And I'm like, "No, like we unfolded that, we iterated that, we expanded that. We believe that this way of delivery based on feedback is now actually more impactful." And it's amazing. Yeah, I really like that distinction that he made them smash it, because we get so attached and identified, and that's dangerous because the world changes, what people need changes, right? What you thought, how you delivered 3 years ago is different now. It's like, yeah, that whole process of like just letting go and continuing to iterate. Yeah, the ego just loves to hang on to things, doesn't it? It's like, keep it.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
natural as well. Like, I don't wanna discredit us. I think it's natural when we spend time that we attach to it and the shape of it and just how it comes out. I've been taking pottery classes for a year, and it's been a really interesting process of like, okay, because in pottery you can't attach to anything until you've done the last burn. Like, you can literally fuck it up in
Mm,
any moment.
love that.
Okay, so you threw it. Okay, but now it might dry badly, and then it might still crack in your first burn, and you might still choose a really bad glazing, and it still might, not come out well, so it's not done until it's done. And it's a really beautiful practice. So I often encourage people actually to look around in life, also just find opportunities to practice these mindsets. I know one of the first things that I did was a service designer that I worked with, same one with the chips bag. She was like, do you know those moments when you fight with somebody and you go, I know why you're saying this. This is because blah, 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 whatever it is that you've made up as a hypothesis. She was like, don't do that. Don't do it. Always ask why. And I remember like at home in my personal relationships, that was the first place where I was like, I caught myself. I was like, okay, how can I access my curiosity in this moment instead? And I think it's the same with clients or, whatever it is the person you're working towards. If you can catch yourself in those moments, like you don't just need to practice this in your work. You can find other situations first. So I look around in life a lot for these things, and then just to kind of draw on practical personal experiences also to move into that kind of more experience-based practices with more confidence as well. Because I think it's that also that sentiment of competence. Well, you can practice it anywhere. So
yeah, it's interesting. As you were saying that, I thought of so many times that like students have got feedback also from their customers or their clients, or whatever, and it's like, oh, we want more one-to-one calls, and then our student will come to us and be like, hey, they've given me this feedback. I'm like, okay, did you ask like why they wanted more one-to-one calls? Because I had this the other week. She was like, I'm going to add and give every one of the 20 students a one-to-one call. I was like, well, that's a lot for you, and I understand that's what they said, but did you ask why? Like, and she was like, oh no, I was just going to do it. And I was like, it'd be really interesting to know like what they thought in the course was actually missing. And maybe that's just one solution of how to get there. But maybe it was just that, I don't know, they didn't feel that connected, or they wanted to talk to you a little bit more that you could do in Slack or something. Like, it was so fascinating how quickly. And then another student that got really angry because everyone said they wanted more community, but then they weren't showing up in the community. And I said to her, did you ask them why? Maybe they don't feel safe. Maybe they don't know each other. It was like, it is funny. We're human beings are interesting. Why we get in our own way in that sense and react versus like really respond.
It is hard. Like I'm also saying this from a massive place of humility that even as a person who dedicatedly practices this, I practice it, and I say that on purpose because I'm not by any means perfecting. But I also think even tying that back to what you're saying around taking these wish lists in and these wishes and requirements and requests, and even tying that back to the 5 E's, for example, is also that sometimes we get then also stuck in thinking that everything has to happen in the delivery phase of something. But as you're saying, when you do inquire about the why, it might be that you can somehow reassure somebody in the lead up to something, or you can also leverage other moments of their journey in really different ways, so that you're not putting all the pressure in the same place and all of the work in the same place. And I think that's also really good way to think about spacing things out, especially when we talk about learning. Because learning isn't like a momentary thing. It's a whole like process.
I was just going to share maybe for those tuning in. So the 5E, am I right in that it's the excitement, entry, engagement, exit, extension? Or is it?
I have to double check so I don't say it wrong.
We'll
I have it in front of me as well, just to make sure.
I remember, grab it. And then because it is a cool process to think about when your customers are coming in. And I was just thinking like my favorite brand is like Lululemon. It's like, when I break it down into that whole thing, well, not my favorite brand, but one of, like, I just love that experience. It's like when I found out like so much more about that brand, I was fascinated, because it's like you come in, they always put your name on the door, right? It's like they know who you are, they see you. It's like your name goes on the door. Then I found out they were all like Landmark education, like Landmark Worldwide Train. They put all their team through what's called the Forum, which is like a 3-day training that I've done as well, which helps you just disappear limitations. And then I was like, oh, that's why their team is so like loving and engaging and very like connected. It's like engagement, right? And I was like breaking down
Yeah.
that whole experience, like you were saying, like maybe a brand that you love. And when Shani shares these 5 E's, just think about, oh yeah, okay, that's what's actually happening at each step.
Yeah. So I've got them here. The first one is entice. And that's more about what we do to like, pull people in, create interest, create desire. That can be more in our communication, but it can also be in interactions that we create in different ways. Then there's enter, and that can look really different. I know we played with the experience of a roller coaster when you're standing in line, and quite often, in theme parks, they will still have that moment be like quite immersive, and maybe you're still standing in something that is like reminding you of the environment that the roller coaster is going to be in. So it's like already preparing you. So the entry can be really important. Then there's the engage. Like that's the moment where things happen, and in a lot of spaces, like that's where the bulk of the experience is. Then there's exit. So engage is actually in the middle of the journey. It's not the end. Then there's exit. So that's how you're coming out. And that can, even in a store, think about, how sometimes people walk around the counter to give you the bag and like, wrap up the experience with this sense of, we all feel differently about those things. But, and then there's extend. And extend is, how you're, and that can be anything from how your bag is designed. And, because some companies, for example, create bags that are really nice and you don't want to throw them away. That's a way of extending it. Or you're taking a roller coaster and they take a picture and you buy the picture and you put it in your fridge. So it can be, really different things from big to small. Or if you're working with a community, it can be an alumni setup. So the extension can look really, really different in that way. And there's just a lot of playfulness in the whole thing, but each of them, I think to your point, when you actually are asking why, what are you missing? Like, well, how do you want to feel? Then you can play with how like it comes out across the whole journey and not just the moment of impact, so to speak, which I think we often tend to focus a lot on that moment, but there's a lot of potential to use other things.
And I was talking to someone this morning and she was sharing about why she came into something, and it's like she was like, I actually saw all the videos. I saw like it just looked amazing. Like I would see all these little like video snippets of people on calls and people winning, and I just thought I want to be part of that, And then she shared these exact things. And then when I signed up, I got a little video from you like, welcome. In this moment, you're probably terrified, wondering like, why did I do this? But you're on the right track. So there's so many micro moments that do make up that whole experience. Yeah, and I'm curious. I feel like extension's an interesting one. I feel like a lot of us, I don't know what you think, but I feel like a lot of us put effort into enticing and things because that's how people obviously bring people into their world. And engagement is also the bulk of what you deliver. Extension's an interesting. I actually think in our industry I think there's a huge amount that people do not do. I think retail is kind of good at it sometimes, but actually services, I feel like just drop a little bit on extension. It's like, do we have re-check-in, re-engagement strategies? Like in ours, people can stay in the community as long as they want. But I find it really interesting. Sometimes people are like, why do you let them do that? I'm like, it elongates their experience. Like we do a graduation and stuff, but then, if you kick them out of your community and that's it, it's like, I don't know. It's just interesting. I wonder if you have any insights on that. But I feel like the extension is like a really under-resourced area that people don't think about that much.
Yeah, I don't know that I have necessarily like insight, but I do share your observation around that. I think we underutilize it. And what I observe is that it also is sometimes come from the sense of urgency or scarcity that we apply at the top. We're like, well, there needs to be like inflow, and sometimes it's, I wonder what would happen if we think about things more relationally and more like, because when we apply more sustainable regenerative thinking to anything, I mean, whether we want to talk about environment or our relationships or our learning, then the extension all of a sudden becomes really important if we're only thinking about growth or more or that we don't have enough, then yeah, of course, like the emphasis is always going to be at the top. But I always like that, and especially I also spend a lot of time like within people functions and with specific focus on learning. And when we talk about learning, we also talk about train, transfer, and sustain, which I think is, similar to what we're saying here is that if you're only doing training, those moments you go to training, you feel so full, and then you go back home and nothing changed, and it's really hard to do anything. And actually, I think when we disregard the exit and the extend, we're disregarding the ability to transfer and sustain the things that we're like taking with us from the engagement piece. Sometimes it's an event's an event, but in particular, I think if we're teaching people something or if we're giving them tools for life, like the extension or how it transfers into their life or how it can become practical is actually like the most important part, because learning isn't that moment of like consuming the knowledge and sitting in the course. It's when you come home and you try to embody it and you try to practice it. So to that end, I think, yeah, there's a lot of ways and angles to think about the extension moment, maybe more in terms of like sustaining, maybe more in terms of actually getting the impact out of the engagement moment. And then there's a whole like array of new questions you could ask yourself, and how people can be supported in that. And put them in a new cycle of enticing. Because I also think that like it doesn't have to be a linear thing. You can also see it as a circle, like a circular movements. Okay, now you went through this process. Here you can go out on your own, or you can be enticed back into something new that you can engage with. And that way it is regenerating itself. And then it allows for that kind of cyclical nature, which I tend to prefer as well. So yeah, I think there's some mind twists there that you can utilize to put a little bit more focus.
I think huge in terms of learning. It's like, and that's what we say with our students is that if you're really creating massive impact through your work, it's like the integration and application of whatever you teach or train is the most impactful piece. So we don't have many of our DIY or self-paced courses or anything. It's all very like a lot of like active support and integration, because that's that huge impact, right? And I like that idea of like looping back, and bringing people back into that, like, it's a whole cyclical process. So people first are like, oh, you're done. Okay, you're finished now. It's like, actually, there's always integration and there's always continuing extension of what you're doing. So yeah, it's gold. Yeah, I think that 5E model was actually really helpful and really cool to break down the type of, when you're designing these customer experiences or what you think might be cool, bearing in mind you have to talk to people and get feedback, as per the first half of this conversation is like, that's the most pivotal piece, right? Is to understand what people are feeling at each stage and then design from there.
Yeah. Who is it? I mean, you mentioned it as well, creating the avatars or the personas or whatever label people choose to put to it. I was sometimes like even think of it in terms of thinking of a scenario further down the line, because I've been asked in moments in my work life where people go, can you come and evaluate this tool? Can you come and help us give an opinion? And I would come into a meeting and they will spend like literal millions on something. And my first question would be, who is this for? And they go, oh, I'm not sure. Well, I don't think we have a meeting. Wow. I think you can come back when you know. Because then when you think about, sometimes you need that trigger, like the absurdity of spending so much time on doing something and you don't even know who it's for and why they need it, is like the ultimate waste of our time and capability as well. And saying that with like, I'm a person who truly believes everyone has immense potential to do great things if only they want to. So this is just about directing our energy.
Yeah, I love that.
Is really about, setting the focus to be able to serve in the best way, to use our own potential as well in the best way, and create the impact that we, think or want to do. It's also that, like, yeah, I just see so much waste in disregarding the human experience when we do.
Yeah, it is.
And
And it's
doing,
really, I feel the same thing. I get super disappointed when I see really talented entrepreneurs and they've built things that are a waste of time, a waste of money. No one needed them. And they feel disheartened and it hasn't impacted anyone's lives. And you're like, just doesn't have to be that way. But it is interesting because the human centered design thinking is not, I don't think it's mainstream. I think it's becoming more like known, but it's not mainstream. The default is to go to what you think, your ego, your perception, and I think we've still got a long way to get it to be the first point of call, especially in corporate.
I mean, corporate is very process driven, but actually to that point, I mean, I think we're all quite indoctrinated with those thoughts throughout our life, throughout our schooling, that, it's a process. There has to be a process in place, it's very checklists and all kinds of things. And it's not so much about enablement. Um, and context. And for me, I mean, just the experience conversation also opens up for more things to come into play, like more parameters, more playroom, more things that could, because our experience in something, there are so many things. If you set up a process in a tech tool, it's a process in a tech tool, but that can be part of an experience, but so are tons of other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
The words that you write, the interactions that you have, a lot of other things kind of come in to create this totality of the context. And I think quite often we think the experience is just one part of it, and then we kind of, cool, we set it up now. Yeah. You didn't really. Like, so it's also that, like, having a slightly more holistic view, I think, both in terms of like the loop that you can take, and the train of actions, but also what can go into each piece.
Yeah.
So you're not just like building it standing on one leg of
Yeah.
something all of the time, which, yeah, I mean, that's a tendency I think we get from a lot of the things we are taught before in life. So yeah, I agree. I don't think it's mainstream. I think people struggle with inquiry as well, struggle with questions. It has like a negative charge sometimes, and actually, yeah, it's ironically you need to experience how much better
Yeah.
it is to believe in
I
it.
fully agree. It's like I felt that in my personal experience, and I see it with all of our students. As prior, they think they just can't figure out why it didn't quite work. Then they learn this methodology, and they're like, "Oh my gosh! Like, why would I have built anything another way? Like, this is the way." It's just you do have to like actually tip into that, and the inquiry and the question and the full surrender that this is not about you and your perception of how you think things should be done. There's like an element of your solution visionary ideator that stays alive, but only ever in the context of you've got feedback, you've got the real problem, you've got their experience. It's like a bit of a paradigm shift. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think once you get it, you're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm still the expert per se,
Yes.
but there's no point bringing all my ideas if they have no like validity or like, rooted in reality for people.
Mhm. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, Shani, where can people follow along your work that you're doing in the world and find out more?
I think the easiest way is probably right now to follow me or connect with me on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. I share and write quite a lot general about just more human experiences, quite a lot on general self-inquiry and self-awareness and reflection, actually, because I think self-curiosity and self-awareness is also a really big door into these practices, however we want to practice them. It's just a very flexible thing. I think I've yet to meet people who work with design who all do the same thing, and which is also beautiful because it's slightly less intimidating to think that you need to come and do exactly what somebody else is doing. So yeah, LinkedIn at the moment,
Perfect.
the best bet.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, amazing. So we'll put the link in the show notes, and I want to thank you for coming in and sharing your wisdom around, how do we really extract the amazing wisdom of other people, and how do we be better leaders? How do we actually think about the design experience and build things that the world need and love? So thank you for being here.